Studies show that when faced with a weapon, 87% of civilians experience tunnel vision, auditory exclusion, and loss of fine motor control. They freeze, they comply, they survive by submission. But on a cold Wednesday evening in Chicago's South Side, inside a half-empty diner called Rosie's 24/7, Kamara Kendra did none of those things. When a Glock 19 was pressed against her temple, she didn't flinch. She didn't scream. She simply told him his grip was wrong and he had 3 seconds to leave. It was the most terrifying thing anyone had ever heard spoken without raising a voice. And watching from the corner booth was the one man powerful enough to recognize what she really was. The overhead fluorescent lights of Rosie's 24/7 diner hummed with that persistent electrical buzz that usually drove new customers away within minutes. For Kamara Kendra, it was just white noise, background static, the soundtrack of a life she'd learned to tolerate rather than live. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Wednesday. The cold Chicago wind rattled the plate glass windows, turning the streets of the South Side into a blur of headlights and frost. Kamara adjusted her brown belt over her black uniform, faded from too many industrial washes, and wiped down the Formica counter with methodical precision. She was 28 years old, but her eyes looked decades older. Tired, watchful, devoid of the light that people expected from a woman her age. She had been working at Rosie's for 2 years. It paid her rent for a studio apartment in Inglewood, covered the sporadic therapy sessions she could barely afford, and most importantly, it kept her invisible. Nobody looked twice at a black waitress in a grease-stained uniform. Nobody asked questions. Nobody expected anything. There were only 4 tables occupied tonight. Near the window, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson sat nursing a cup of chamomile tea, her arthritic hands wrapped around the ceramic mug for warmth. At table 3, a teenage couple whispered to each other with the intensity of first love, oblivious to the world. At the counter, a trucker named Ray stared into his coffee like it held answers to questions he'd stopped asking years ago. And in the back corner booth, the one with the torn red vinyl cushion that nobody ever chose unless everything else was taken, sat a man who didn't belong. Kamara had noticed him the moment he'd walked in 20 minutes ago. He was Japanese, mid-60s, perhaps older. That wearing a suit that cost more than Rosie's entire month of revenue, navy blue, tailored to absolute perfection, the kind of precision that whispered old money and new power. His hair was white, as was his neatly trimmed beard, lending him a distinguished, weathered presence. His eyes were the color of black coffee, sharp and calculating, and he sat with his back to the wall, facing the entrance. Textbook security positioning. He hadn't ordered food, just coffee. Black. And when Kamara had poured it, his eyes hadn't just looked at her. They had assessed her, measured her. Like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. She'd felt the weight of that gaze even after she'd walked away. Kamara moved toward his booth now, the coffee pot in her hand, her movements automatic. Muscle memory from 1,000 shifts. "Refill?" she asked. Knew her voice flat, professional, empty of inflection. The man looked up. His eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that would have made most people look away. Kamara held his gaze without blinking. "Please," he said. His voice was low, controlled, with the faintest trace of a Japanese accent beneath flawless English. The kind of voice that commanded boardrooms and never had to raise itself to be heard. Kamara poured the steaming black liquid into his cup. As she did, she noticed details. No wedding ring, no watch, despite the expensive suit. But on his right hand, across the knuckles, there were faint scars. Old, barely visible, but there. The kind you get from fighting. He noticed her noticing. "Thank you," he said, his tone giving nothing away. Kamara nodded and walked back toward the counter, setting the pot back on the warmer. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 9:51 p.m. 3 hours and 9 minutes until her shift ended. 3 hours and 9 minutes of pouring coffee, wiping tables, and pretending she wasn't slowly suffocating under the weight of a past she couldn't outrun. That was when the bell above the door chimed. It wasn't the polite ding of a customer entering. It was harsh, violent. The door had been kicked open so hard it slammed against the wall, and the glass rattled in its frame like a gunshot. "Everybody on the fucking ground, now!" The shout was raw, desperate, cracking with adrenaline. Kamara's body went still, not frozen, still. There was a difference. She turned slowly. A masked man stood in the doorway, black tactical clothing, a black and red mask covering his face, and in his right hand, a Glock 19 9mm semi-automatic. Held at chest level with an improper grip. Thumb over the slide, index finger trembling on the trigger. Behind him, 2 more men, same masks, one holding a crowbar, the other twitching, his eyes visible through the mask, pupils dilated, jaw clenched, high on something. Meth, probably. Mrs. Patterson screamed. The teenage couple dropped to the floor immediately, the girl sobbing. Ray the trucker raised his hands slowly, his face pale. Kamara didn't move. The lead gunman marched toward the counter, the weapon swinging wildly in his inexperienced grip. "I said, get on the ground, bitch!" Kamara leaned her hip against the counter. She crossed her arms. Her face remained expressionless, her voice calm and measured when she spoke. "The register's open," she said. Her tone was flat, clinical. When it sliced through the panic in the room like a scalpel through skin. "Take the cash, leave the tips are mine." The gunman froze. He blinked behind the mask, clearly expecting screaming, begging, compliance. Not this. He closed the distance in 3 aggressive steps and shoved the barrel of the Glock against Kamara's temple. The cold metal pressed into her dark skin. She could smell gun oil and cheap cologne mixed with nervous sweat. "You think this is a fucking joke?" he spat, his voice cracking. "I will blow your head off right here." In the corner booth, the man in the navy blue suit shifted. His hand began to move beneath his jacket. Kamara's eyes flicked toward him for a fraction of a second, just long enough to send a message. Don't. She looked back at the gunman, directly into his eyes, and when she spoke, and her voice was colder than the Chicago winter outside, "Your safety's off, but your grip says you've never fired under stress. Thumb over the slide. That's a mistake. The recoil will throw your second shot high and left, probably into the ceiling. And judging by the way your hand is shaking, you're scared. Scared people hesitate. Hesitation gets you caught." The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating. The gunman's eyes darted down to the weapon, his grip, his thumb. Confusion spread across what was visible of his face. "What the fuck are you—" "You have about 30 seconds before the cops arrive," Kamara continued in that same bored, terrifyingly calm tone. "There's a precinct 2 blocks west. Shift change happened at 9:30. That means there are twice as many patrol cars on the street right now. I can already hear the sirens." She was lying. She hadn't called anyone. There were no sirens. But she said it with such absolute, bone-chilling conviction that the air seemed to leave the room. The gunman's head snapped toward the door. His accomplices looked at each other, panic spreading. "She's bluffing!" the one with the crowbar shouted. "Just shoot her!" "I can't. The safety. Where the fuck is it?" The gunman stammered, fumbling with the weapon, his fingers clumsy with fear and adrenaline. Kamara reached under the counter. The 3 men flinched, expecting a weapon. She pulled out a pack of Marlboros and a lighter. She lit a cigarette slowly, deliberately, and took a long drag. The tip glowed orange in the dim light of the diner. She exhaled smoke toward the ceiling, her eyes never leaving the gunman's face. "Our 30 seconds," she said quietly. "Leave now, and you get away. Stay, and you go to prison. Your choice." And then, as if summoned by her words, the distant wail of sirens began to rise in the night. Pure coincidence, pure luck. But to the 3 masked men, it sounded like prophecy. "Fuck this!" the twitchy ones screamed. They ran, tripping over each other, slamming into the doorframe. The gunman dropped a glove in his panic. They disappeared into the freezing night, leaving the register untouched, leaving chaos in their wake. Kamara took another drag of her cigarette. She walked to the door with measured steps, closed it, locked it, and flipped the sign to closed. Then she turned to the terrified customers on the floor. "You okay, Mrs. Patterson?" she asked, her voice gentle now, the ice thawed. "You want some pie?" On the house." The elderly woman nodded, tears streaming down her face. Kamara walked back to the counter and picked up the coffee pot. Her hands were steady, perfectly steady, like nothing had happened. But her heart was hammering against her ribs, adrenaline screaming through her veins. The old instincts had kicked in: threat assessment, de-escalation, tactical positioning, all the training she'd sworn she would never use again. She felt the presence before she heard the footsteps. She turned. The man from the corner booth was standing there. Up close, he was taller than she'd realized. 6 feet, maybe more. His white beard and hair gave him a commanding, almost patriarchal gravity, but his eyes were sharp as a blade's edge. His presence filled the space between them with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. And he wasn't looking at the door. He wasn't looking at the fleeing robbers. He was looking at her. "You lied," he said quietly. His voice was calm, but there was something beneath it. Not accusation, analysis. Kamara refilled his coffee cup even though it was still half full. About what? The safety. His dark eyes didn't blink. A Glock 19 doesn't have a manual safety. It's a trigger safety system. If he'd pulled that trigger, you would be dead. Kamara set the pot down. She met his gaze without fear, without apology. He didn't know that. Amateurs never know their equipment, and scared amateurs run when you give them an excuse. The man studied her face, searching for something. A crack in the armor, a flicker of fear. He found nothing. "You assessed the weapon model," he said slowly, as if testing each word. "You read his body language. You manipulated his fear response. And you stayed calm with a loaded gun pressed to your head." He paused. "That's not luck. That's training." Kamara's jaw tightened. "Mister, I make $12 an hour plus tips. I don't have the energy to be anything but calm." She ripped a check off her pad and placed it on the counter with more force than necessary. "That'll be $8.50, unless you want dessert." The man reached into his jacket, not for a weapon, but for a wallet. Italian leather. He pulled out a money clip thick with $100 bills and peeled off 3. $300 for an $8 cup of coffee. "Keep the change," he said. He turned toward the door, his movements precise and deliberate. But before he left, he paused, his hand on the handle, and looked back at her. "What's your name?" he asked. Kamara hesitated. Every instinct told her not to answer, not to engage, not to be seen. But something in his eyes, recognition, maybe, made her respond. "Kamara? Kamara?" He tasted the name like he was memorizing it. "I'm Misaki Goro." The name hit her like a freight train. Misaki Goro, the billionaire, the CEO of Goro Industries, one of the richest men in the world, tech, AI power. She'd seen his face on the cover of Fortune magazine in the break room. "Good for you," Kamara said, her voice deliberately unimpressed. "Don't come back." Misaki's lips curved into something that might have been a smile, a small, dangerous expression that transformed his face from distinguished to predatory. "I think I will," he said softly. And then he was gone. Disappearing into the Chicago night in a sleek black sedan that had been waiting at the curb, Kamara stood frozen behind the counter, watching the taillights fade into the darkness. The moment the car was out of sight, her legs gave out. She slid down the back of the counter and sat on the dirty floor, her head between her knees, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Her hands were shaking now. The cigarette fell from her fingers, still lit, burning a small mark on the linoleum. She wasn't brave. She wasn't calm. She was just so goddamn tired of pretending to be alive when all she felt was numb. But for one brief moment, when that gun was pressed to her head, when she'd spoken with the voice of the soldier she used to be, she'd felt something, purpose, and that terrified her more than any weapon ever could. Misaki Goro didn't believe in coincidences. At 65, he'd built a $47 billion empire by trusting data, not luck. And the data on Kamara Kendra didn't make sense. "Sir, you need to see this." Yuki Tanaka, his assistant, slid a tablet across the desk in his Tokyo office. "The Waitress from Chicago." Misaki scanned the file. "Military service, Army intelligence, cyber warfare specialist, medical discharge 2 years ago after a mission in Syria went catastrophically wrong. 12 soldiers entered. 3 survived. The rest died in an ambush caused by leaked intelligence. Kamara Kendra had watched her best friend bleed out in her arms. "She's not hiding from the law," Misaki said quietly. "She's hiding from herself." His parents had been murdered when he was 19, corporate assassination. Then he'd found their bodies in the family home, their blood pooling on the marble floor of the entryway. He understood survival guilt. He understood living when you should have died. 3 days later, Misaki walked into Rosie's diner during Kamara's afternoon shift. He sat at the counter, ordered coffee, waited. She recognized him immediately. Her jaw tightened. "I don't know what you think you saw," she said, her voice flat. "But you're wrong. I'm nobody." "You assess the weapon model," Misaki replied calmly. "Calculated the shooter's skill level. Deployed tactical psychology to neutralize the threat without violence. That's not nobody. That's someone trained by the best." He slid a business card across the counter. "Executive security consultant, Goro Industries, $250,000 a year. Full benefits. Housing allowance." "I don't work for corporations," Kamara said. "I don't work for people like you, and I definitely don't need your pity." Misaki reached into his jacket and pulled out a file. He opened it slowly, deliberately. Inside was a photograph of a man in Army Ranger dress uniform, Sergeant Major David Kendra, Bronze Star, killed in Afghanistan. Kamara's breath caught. "Your father protected people," Misaki said. "You're doing his memory a disservice by hiding in a diner." Kamara's hands trembled. Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't know anything about my father or me. Get out." Misaki stood. He left the business card on the counter. "When you're ready to stop punishing yourself for surviving, call me. The offer stands for 72 hours. He walked out into the Chicago cold, or leaving her standing there with her father's ghost. Kamara stared at the eviction notice taped to her apartment door. 72 hours. The same deadline Misaki had given her. The universe had a sick sense of humor. She dialed the number on the business card with shaking fingers. 3-month trial, she said when he answered. "If I don't like it, I walk. No questions." Agreed. Goro Tower was a 67-story monument to power, all glass and steel, reflecting the Chicago skyline like a mirror. Kamara felt small walking through the marble lobby in her thrift store blazer. Yuki Tanaka met her on the 40th floor, sharp, professional, protective of Misaki. "He doesn't trust easily," she said. "You should know that." The orientation was overwhelming. AI systems, machine learning, autonomous weapons, the technology that could save the world or destroy it. Marcus Chen, the CFO, shook her hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome aboard, Miss Kendra. Quite the unconventional hire." Elena Rodriguez, head of security and former Secret Service, looked at her like she was a problem to solve. "No offense, but we have protocols, experience requirements. You're a waitress?" Kamara finished. "I know what I am, what I was, but I'm here now and I don't plan on wasting anyone's time." Misaki's office was all windows. He sat behind a desk that probably cost more than her yearly rent, but his eyes held the same exhaustion she saw in the mirror every morning. "Why me?" Kamara asked. "You could hire anyone." "I need someone who can't be bought," Misaki said. "Someone with integrity. Or someone who will tell me when I'm wrong." "You want a watchdog? Or do you want someone to make you feel better about your ruthless reputation?" Misaki's expression didn't change. "I want someone who will stop me from becoming my father's killers." The words hung in the air between them. Two people haunted by the dead. Two people trying to do better than what was done to them. Kamara nodded slowly. "Then let's get to work." But as she left his office, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made a deal with the devil. Or maybe she'd just found the only person who understood what it meant to live with ghosts. 2 weeks into the job, Kamara sat in her first board meeting, trying not to feel like an imposter. 14 executives in $1,000 suits. And her, the waitress. Midway through Marcus Chen's quarterly report, Kamara's security tablet lit up. Anomalous network activity, data packets flowing outward. Someone was exfiltrating information in real time, using the distracted executives as cover. She had 5 seconds to decide, interrupt and risk humiliation if she was wrong, or stay silent and watch millions in intellectual property disappear. Kamara stood. "We're being hacked, right now." The room went silent. Chen's face twisted with condescension. "Miss Kendra, I'm sure our IT department can handle—" "Sit down," Misaki said quietly. His eyes were on Kamara. "Show us." Kamara connected her tablet to the conference room screen. Lines of code scrolled past, data packets traced to a shell company in Shanghai. 2.3 million in proprietary AI research being stolen while they sat in their leather chairs talking about profit margins. "6 minutes," she said, coordinating with IT through her earpiece. "Isolate the breach, trace the back door, shut it down." The room watched in silence as she worked. Elena Rodriguez looked impressed despite herself. Marcus Chen looked furious. 5 minutes and 43 seconds later, the attack was stopped. Misaki stood. His voice was ice. "Miss Kendra just saved this company tens of millions in intellectual property. Anyone have questions about her qualifications now?" Silence. Kamara sat down, her hands shaking beneath the table. But inside, for the first time in 2 years, she felt something she'd thought was dead. Purpose. That night, she went home to her cramped apartment and slept without nightmares. She woke up thinking about work instead of Syria, about protecting instead of surviving. She didn't know it yet. But the attack she'd stopped was just the beginning. Marcus Chen had been testing her, and she'd just proven she was exactly the obstacle he'd feared. Outside her apartment window, a black sedan idled in the darkness. Inside, a man watched her silhouette through the curtains and made a phone call. "The consultant is a problem. We need to accelerate the timeline." The restaurant was the kind of place where the wine list had 3 digits, and the waiters spoke in reverent whispers. Misaki sat across from Elena Volkov, CEO of Voltech, negotiating a potential merger that could reshape the AI industry. Kamara stood against the wall watching. Security consultant. Silent observer. But her eyes tracked every micro-expression on Elena's face. Elena Volkov was 42, brilliant and ruthless. She wore power like a second skin. She was testing Misaki's weaknesses. "Your company is vulnerable without strong leadership," she said, her voice silk over steel. "One wrong move and your empire crumbles." Then she turned to Kamara, her smile sharp. "Misaki, I heard you hired your waitress. How progressive. Does she also validate parking?" The insult hung in the air. Misaki's expression didn't change, but Kamara saw his hand tighten on his water glass. Kamara smiled, and then she spoke in flawless Russian. "Careful, Elena. Underestimating people is how empires fall. I'd hate to see yours collapse because you confused kindness for weakness." Elena's face went pale. She hadn't expected Kamara to speak her native language. Hadn't expected her to know about Voltec's hidden financial vulnerabilities. Kamara leaned close to Misaki and whispered in Japanese, "Or she's bluffing. Her quarterly earnings drop next week. She needs this merger more than you do." Misaki's negotiation strategy shifted instantly. Within minutes, Elena was backpedaling. Within an hour, she was leaving the restaurant empty-handed and furious. In the car ride back to Goro Tower, Misaki finally spoke. "You speak Russian and Japanese?" "Army intelligence trains you to be useful," Kamara said. "I speak 6 languages. It was part of the job." "You're not just protecting my life," Misaki said quietly. "You're protecting my empire." Kamara looked out at the Chicago skyline. "I know, and I'm good at it." But what she didn't say was that protecting Misaki was becoming something more than a job. It was becoming personal. And in her experience, personal meant vulnerable. Vulnerable meant people died. She couldn't afford to care. But she was starting to anyway. And somewhere in the shadows of Goro Tower, Marcus Chen was watching, planning, and preparing to remove the obstacle standing between him and $47 billion. It was past midnight when Kamara heard the voices. She'd been reviewing security protocols in her office when the conversation drifted through the crack in the conference room door. Marcus Chen's voice, low, urgent. "The accident needs to happen at the gala. High profile, lots of witnesses, balcony malfunction, he'll never see it coming." A second voice, Raj Patel, head of building security. "What about the consultant? She's sharp, she might notice." Chen's laugh was cold. "She's a waitress playing soldier. She won't know what to look for, and if she does, we'll handle her too." Kamara's blood turned to ice. She pulled out her phone, recording the rest of the conversation with hands that had gone perfectly steady. Tactical mode. The old training kicking in. Misaki was the target. And the threat was coming from inside. She spent the next 3 days investigating financial records, encrypted communications, shell companies. The trail led to a Chinese tech syndicate. Chen wasn't just planning murder. He was selling Goro Industries' AI technology to foreign interests, embezzling millions, building an empire on Misaki's corpse. The gala was in 5 days. Kamara found Misaki in his office at 3 a.m., still working. She locked the door, played the recording, showed him the evidence. His face remained expressionless, but she saw the muscle jump in his jaw. "I trusted Marcus for 8 years. He was at my father's funeral." "Betrayal is always intimate," Kamara said. "The people who can hurt you most are the ones you let close." "What do you recommend?" "We don't confront him yet. We let him think we're oblivious. On the night of the gala, we catch him in the act with witnesses. Then we destroy him." Misaki looked at her for a long moment. "You're not doing this for a paycheck anymore, are you?" Kamara met his eyes. "No, I'm not." "Then we're partners now, not employer and employee." "Partners," she agreed. But as she left his office, her hands started shaking. She'd crossed a line. She cared about Misaki Goro, and caring meant she had something to lose. In her apartment that night, she cleaned her father's old combat knife. 5 days until the gala, 5 days to prepare for war. And Marcus Chen had no idea he was about to face someone who'd survived Syria. The Peninsula Hotel glittered like a diamond. Chicago's elite filled the penthouse ballroom in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, champagne flutes catching the light like promises. Kamara moved through the crowd in a black gown, elegant and lethal, concealed blade strapped to her thigh, earpiece hidden beneath her hair. Misaki stood at the center, calm and poised, scheduled to give his traditional toast on the penthouse balcony overlooking the city. Marcus Chen circulated through the guests, all smiles and charm. Raj Patel hovered near the exits, his eyes too watchful. Kamara spotted the anomalies, maintenance workers she didn't recognize, Chen's nervous energy, Patel checking his watch every 30 seconds. Misaki's personal bodyguard called away on a fake emergency. It was happening now. Misaki stepped toward the balcony, where the crowd parted. Cameras flashed. Kamara moved through the bodies, ignoring protocol, her tactical instincts screaming. She saw it. The subtle structural weakness in the railing, sabotage hidden in plain sight. Misaki leaned against the rail. Kamara lunged forward, grabbing his arm and yanking him backward just as the metal gave way with a terrible shriek. A section of balcony plummeted 20 stories, crashing into the street below. Screaming, panic, chaos, then gunfire. 2 guests pulled weapons, claiming active shooter panic, but their aim was precise, targeting Misaki. Kamara shielded him with her body, using the panicked crowd for cover. The first operative raised his weapon. She moved on instinct. Precise strike to the wrist, disarming him. Elbow to the throat, dropping him. The second operative aimed. Hotel security tackled him from behind. The room erupted in flashes, media cameras capturing everything. Kamara standing over Misaki, protective and fierce, the waitress who saved a billionaire. Security footage would later show Marcus Chen trying to slip away through the service entrance, Raj Patel attempting to delete evidence from his phone, both arrested within the hour. But in that moment, in the aftermath of almost losing everything, Kamara and Misaki stood together in the wreckage of the balcony. His hand found hers, and for the first time since Syria, Kamara wasn't afraid to hold on. She'd stopped hiding. She was a warrior again, and the world was watching. The media circus raged outside the penthouse windows, but inside, there was only silence. Kamara's hands shook as she cleaned the scrapes on Misaki's palms and the bruises forming on his ribs from where she'd tackled him away from the collapsing balcony. "You're trembling," he said quietly. "Adrenaline crash." She lied. But it wasn't adrenaline. It was Syria. The flashback hit her like a freight train. Her hands weren't cleaning Misaki's wounds. They were pressed against her best friend's chest, trying to stop the bleeding, watching the light fade from his eyes while gunfire echoed around them. 12 went in. 3 came back. The tremors became violent. Kamara couldn't breathe. Misaki didn't try to fix her. He just took her shaking hands in his and held them until the flashback loosened its grip. "My unit was ambushed in Syria," Kamara whispered. "Intelligence leak. We were supposed to extract a defector, but someone sold us out. 12 of us went in. 3 came back. My best friend died in my arms, and I couldn't stop the bleeding. I came home, and everyone called me a hero, but all I am is a survivor who got lucky while better people died." Misaki's grip tightened. "When I was 19, my parents were murdered in our home. Corporate assassination, rivals who wanted our company. I found them. I was supposed to be there, but I'd stayed late at university. I survived because I was absent. I built this empire on their graves, and every day I wonder if I'm honoring them or just feeding my own rage." They were both survivors, both carrying impossible guilt, both using their current lives as penance for living when others died. "I'm terrified of caring about you," Kamara admitted. "Everyone I care about dies or leaves." "I'm terrified of needing you," Misaki said. "Needing anyone. But I do. And I think you need me too." The kiss was tentative at first, then desperate. 2 broken people finding solace in shared trauma, in mutual understanding, in the recognition that they'd both been alone for too long. They didn't say, "I love you." It was too soon, too raw. But they acknowledged the truth neither could deny. They were in this together now, partners in every sense, and tomorrow they would face the boardroom, together. 1 week after the gala, Marcus Chen sat at the head of the Goro Industries conference table, out on bail courtesy of expensive lawyers, backed by hostile shareholders led by Elena Volkov, who'd bought shares specifically for this coup. "I call for a vote of no confidence," Chen announced. "Misaki Goro has demonstrated mental instability, poor judgment in hiring unqualified consultants, and paranoid delusions about loyal employees. The board split 50-50, some loyal to Misaki, others siding with Chen and the promise of profit. Misaki presented evidence, financial records showing embezzlement, communications proving industrial espionage, testimony from arrested operatives. Chen smiled. Fabricated, desperate. The waitress has manipulated him emotionally. She's a security risk, not a security consultant. The tension was suffocating. Kamara stood, officially appointed chief security officer after the gala. She had authority now. She connected her tablet to the screen. Marcus Chen sold Goro Industries' AI technology to a Chinese syndicate, she said. He embezzled $47 million over 3 years. He planned Misaki's murder to cover the theft. And he underestimated me because I used to serve coffee. She played forensic financial records, communications intercepts, video testimony from operatives who'd cut deals to testify against Chen. Irrefutable. Chen's face went pale, then desperate. He triggered his contingency, hidden mercenaries stationed in the building, sent to extract him and destroy evidence. The building went into lockdown, doors sealed, elevators frozen. Kamara coordinated via earpiece, directing civilians to safe zones, tracking mercenaries through security feeds. She cornered them on the 42nd floor server room with her security team. "You're not being paid enough to die for a man who's going to prison," she said, her voice the same tactical calm from the diner robbery. "Drop your weapons and you walk out. Fight." And you don't. The mercenaries recognized a trained operator when they saw one. They dropped their weapons. FBI agents entered. Chen was arrested. The hostile shareholders retreated. Misaki's position was secured. And Kamara Kendra, former waitress, stood in the boardroom of a $47 billion empire as its chief security officer. She'd reclaimed her power, her purpose. But the war wasn't over. Elena Volkov was still out there, and revenge was patient. 6 months later, Kamara sat in the booth at Rosie's diner where it had all begun. The diner looked different now. She'd bought it, converted it into Kendra House, a community center with job training for veterans struggling to reintegrate into civilian life. Misaki slid into the booth across from her. "Regrets?" he asked. "Never," she said. And the media had stopped calling her the waitress who saved a billionaire. Now she was the CSO transforming corporate security and the veteran advocating for ethical AI. She'd restructured Goro Industries' security division, launched an ethical AI initiative, used her military contacts to prevent technology exploitation. That morning, a corporate spy had attempted to plant surveillance in Goro Tower. Kamara had intercepted them personally. "You can go to prison for corporate espionage," she'd said, "or you can take a legitimate job in my security division, use your skills for protection instead of theft, build something you can be proud of." The spy had chosen redemption. Later, Kamara and Misaki stood at the top of Goro Tower overlooking Chicago. The city stretched below them like a promise. "You changed me," Misaki said. I was building an empire on ruthlessness and rage. You showed me there's another way. Power with integrity, success with purpose." Kamara looked at the man she'd saved, the man who'd saved her in return. "I spent 2 years serving coffee and hiding from my past. Now I serve a purpose and honor my father's legacy. The waitress is gone. The warrior remains." They stood together, 2 damaged people who'd found partnership, purpose, and love, transforming a ruthless corporate empire into a force for good. But then Kamara's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. No words, just a photograph. Her father's military file, the classified mission in Syria, the intelligence leak that killed her unit, and a name she recognized. Misaki Goro. Her blood turned to ice. The phone slipped from her fingers. Misaki turned. "Kamara." "Oh, what's wrong?" She looked at him. The man she trusted. The man she loved. And for the first time since that night in the diner, she felt the cold barrel of betrayal pressed against her temple. "Tell me you didn't know," she whispered. "Know what?" But the look in his eyes said everything. and Kamara realized the war had never ended. It had only just begun.